This is the Nedgroup Investments Insights podcast, where one or more of our experts explore a variety of views and insights that investors care about.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Nedgroup Investments Insights podcast. I'm David Levinson, and today I'm chatting to Nic Andrew, our managing executive at Nedgroup Investments, about the four futures of AI, and I'm excited to get into it. Nic, hello and welcome back.
Hi, David, and thanks for hosting the conversation today.
I have to admit I was quite excited, but also a little insecure when the team asked me to host this discussion. Firstly, we have a colleague, Nic Andrew, who is our resident AI expert. And when I leave my chats with Jay, I'm often left wondering if we're speaking the same language. And secondly, maybe for our listeners' context, we run a staff survey to determine our AI proficiency. And Nic, you'll be happy to hear that I've recently graduated from an AI skeptic to an AI practitioner. But I imagine you come out of these surveys as an AI expert?
I did.
Okay, so I think what that does is create something quite nice for our audience that we're getting both sides of the AI curve, if I can call it that. So, Nic, moving to your article, you suggest that AI seems to be everywhere right now. It's in your own staff town halls, when you feed back to Nedgroup Investments, it's in boardrooms, earnings calls, even dinner conversations. So in your article, you say the question is no longer whether AI will matter, but what kind of society it will shape. Why do you think we've crossed that line?
Thanks, David. I think it's because the pace and the scale has changed so much. And you talked in the intro a bit about being unsure, and I think a lot of us don't know the answers. But I think what's happening is that this isn't a marginal technology that improves productivity at the edges. To me, it seems structural when a capability becomes embedded across almost every sector, whether it be law, medicine, finance, education, investing. It stops being a tool and starts becoming part of the environment we operate in. At that point, the real question is no longer adoption, but direction. What do we choose to build and who benefits from it?
Okay, I think it's clear you're very open about feeling both excited on the one side about AI, but also uneasy about it. Firstly, what excites you the most about its potential? And then what worries you if we do get this wrong?
Yeah, for me, the excitement is obvious. Properly applied, AI can help us tackle problems that have stubbornly resisted progress for ages. Things from personalized education to medical solutions, from energy efficiency to productivity, and you just think of the incredible opportunities this creates for entrepreneurs and small businesses. The unease, on the other hand, comes from the distribution of those gains and the potential knock-on impact. If we treat AI purely as a cost-cutting or competitive weapon, I think we risk amplifying inequality, hollowing out entry points into work, and eroding trust in institutions.
I was reading a recent research report suggesting that 10% of new graduates with bachelor's degrees or higher in South Africa are not finding jobs. And in your article, you write that statistics like these really land when you think about your own children. So how has that personal lens really changed the way you think about AI and future skills?
Yes, so definitely when you think about it personally, it makes it really concrete. I remember a few years ago giving fatherly advice to my daughter who was at university and saying, coding was an absolute non-negotiable skill. Well, just a few years on today, I'm not sure that that's the advantage that it once was on its own. What matters much more now are things like adaptability, learning how to work with AI, how to ask better questions, how to exercise and apply judgment, and very importantly, human relationships. And that's a very different skills agenda, and I think one we're still catching up to.
On the notion of fatherly advice, I remember my own father is full of wonderful metaphors, and I recall when packing my own bags for university, he told me that studying is like surfing a wave. You need to stay ahead of it because if you fall behind, it's near impossible to catch up. So for me, personally, one of the most striking metaphors in your article is you've taken my father's wave analogy a step further, and you've said that AI isn't just a wave you ride, but rather a tide that redraws the coastline. And I emphasize the word tide. So what does that mean in practical terms for organizations?
Yes, for me, a wave comes and goes, but a tide quietly reshapes everything. And for me, AI won't be something that you implement once and move on. it's going to become woven into workflows, decision processes, and organizational design. I think many leaders, because there's so much unknowns, often underestimate the second-order effects, not just what tasks are automated, but how roles change, how teams interact, and how entire businesses may be both disrupted and transformed.
And where do you think organizations tend to underestimate that impact the most?
For me, one of the areas is, I think, the one that you highlighted earlier in the research you read, which is really at the junior level. If AI absorbs routine analytical or administrative work, then you have to consciously redesign how people learn and progress, because that's often where they start and where they learn about judgment. If we don't do that, we may become very efficient in the short term, but brittle in the long term.
I was listening to a podcast recently where it was suggested that we think a lot about how AI is going to replace humans, when actually the better question is, how will humans shape AI? And you frame the future of AI, Nic, as a fork in the road, shaped by two forces. The first being who gets access to the capability, and the second, whether it can be trusted. I guess the question is, why these two?
For me, AI is a multiplier. If access is broad and trust is strong, it can really amplify things like productivity and opportunity. However, if access is narrow or trust is weak, I think it then amplifies the negative things like inequality, fraud, and instability. Capability without trust is really dangerous, and trust without access becomes exclusionary. The interaction between these two forces, I think, determines a lot around what the end outcome is going to look like.
Okay, so before we dig into the four futures you've identified, you have come up with very creative names. So in the spirit of full disclosure, did AI help you with these?
100% AI helped me with these.
Okay, we appreciate that. So let's talk through these four futures or scenarios that you've outlined. The first is the curiously named jetpacks with seatbelts, which you describe as broad access combined with strong governance. So I'm still chuckling at your previous answer. And to borrow from Clem Santa, why do you see this as the high road outcome?
I think for me it's because it focuses on job redesign rather than job destruction. AI takes over tasks, not purpose. So let's think teachers can become more effective by being coaches instead of markers. Doctors spend less time on admin and more time on care and patient engagement. Small businesses get to leverage that previously required scale. And what makes this sustainable is what I call trust infrastructure. So it might be logging or audits or human override so that people believe that the system is both fair and accountable.
And when you talk about governance, what does that look like in practice rather than principle?
I think it's a difficult question and I don't know all the answers, but I think it looks like real auditability for systems that are really critical. So things like credit, like hiring, like healthcare, and clear accountability when things go wrong. What we need is transparency that allows challenges and appeals, because I think without these elements, the trust just remains very fragile.
Okay, so moving on from jetpacks with seatbelts, the second scenario, which you've labelled as the licensed pilots, is still a high road option, but a more uncomfortable one. Safe but unequal. Why is this future risky in your view?
Because when the outcomes are consistently unequal, even if the process feels fair, resentment builds in the world. In this world, AI becomes a bit like aviation. It's reliable and regulated, but expensive. What that means is smaller firms and countries rent intelligence rather than own it, and strategic autonomy erodes over time.
And is there a danger that organizations settle for this because it feels controllable?
Absolutely. I think it's a proper risk. Stability can be very attractive, but if the access keeps narrowing, you eventually pay for this both socially and politically.
Okay, scenario 3, another curiously named, walled garden wealth. You say the biggest danger isn't mass unemployment, but the disappearance of the first rung of the career ladder. Why is that so critical?
And this is going back to what we chatted around earlier. It's because judgment is built, not downloaded. Entry-level roles have always been where people learn context, they learn trade-offs, they learn responsibility. If AI absorbs that work without creating new on-ramps, you end up with a society that might be productive but exclusionary, and eventually, that ends up being unstable.
So in asset management, we love signals and indicators and flags. So what are warning signs, or what are the warning signs at least, that leaders should be watching out for in this scenario?
I imagine that there are many, but one of the ones that I'm particularly looking at is the pressure on graduate roles, slow progression, and then growing frustration amongst highly educated young people. Those are the signals that opportunity is not keeping pace with this productivity that we've been talking about.
And then finally, on the final scenario, and I love the use of alliteration here, is the deepfake discount. This feels less about economics and more about trust. What does life look like in a trust collapse society?
Yeah, I think this is the really one you want to try and avoid, because then everything becomes more expensive in non-obvious ways. Verification takes time, transactions slow down, people retreat into smaller closed networks. Society pays a constant verification tax, not just in money, but in friction and suspicion.
And I guess once trust erodes, how difficult is that to rebuild?
I think it's extremely difficult. Trust collapses gradually, but rebuilding it requires sustained effort and credible institutions. There are no quick fixes.
Okay, so you've outlined 4 signposts that reveal which future is emerging. So if listeners track just one, which would it be? I
think it's how we deal with young people entering the workforce, the so-called first rung. If organizations take job redesign seriously and invest in new entry points, to me, that's a strong signal that we're choosing the high road.
Actually, Nic, just a couple of days ago, there was a wonderful BBC headline saying that AI chatbots could be making you stupider. The key risk is long-term cognitive decline if AI is used as a shortcut. But importantly, what the article does stress is that AI can still be beneficial when used to challenge thinking, not replace it. So really a hybrid intelligence approach. And you end your article by saying that AI won't automatically create a better society, just a more capable one. So what's the most important choice leaders need to make now?
I think it's probably, first of all, to be deliberate. I think one needs to think about what regulation is required. We need to think about job design and education, because those things won't necessarily sort themselves out. The high road is definitely available, but I don't think we must take it for granted. It requires conscious choices made early. And the other item is that I think we need to be open-minded, because this is moving so fast and we certainly don't know all the answers.
Nic, thank you for having this conversation with me. I think your insights are grounded and thoughtful, and a thoughtful way at least to think about AI without hype or panic. Thank you for our listeners for tuning in, and stay tuned for the next episode. And who knows, next time you hear my voice, I may have graduated from an AI practitioner to an AI expert.
Thanks very much, David.
This podcast is for marketing purposes only. The information contained in the podcast or video was for information purposes and does not constitute advice, recommendation, or an offer or solicitation to purchase or sell any funds or strategies to any person in any jurisdiction in which the offer, recommendation, or solicitation to purchase would be unlawful.